afternoon. I hope everyone is staying well and safe during this time. My name is Paige McDonough. I work as a Career Development Officer at QCDC. I have over 11 years of experience in education. So I've worked as a career advisor at a university in Brisbane, Australia. And prior to that, I worked as a counselor and an educator, just like yourself, in high schools back in the US. So that's a bit about my background. I would like to begin by going through the guidelines for today. So for today's session, it is being recorded. With that being said, I would like to encourage your participation, particularly utilizing your audio or video functions. Feel free at any time to unmute yourself and ask me questions. I don't have a problem with that. You can also utilize the chat function, but keep in mind it can be a little bit difficult for me to keep my eye on the chat as well as presenting. So I encourage you to use your video and audio if you feel comfortable. In addition, I will allow time at the end of the session for questions. So we will have that time allocated there for that. If I may, with that being said, if you are not speaking, if you could just keep your microphone muted so as to minimize any distraction. So if you aren't speaking, just keep your microphone muted, but do feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. In addition, I've got a couple of polls in the presentation that you can use a QR code for. So if you've got your mobile phone handy, keep that near you because you can just utilize the camera feature to access the QR code and participate in the polls. And then lastly, I will have a survey at the end. So before you leave, I would love to receive your feedback on today's session. So if you could please ensure you fill out the survey at the end, that would be fantastic. Okay, so an outline of what we will be discussing today. I first will clarify and explain to everyone who QCDC is. Then I will be talking about reference letters, the basics, the inclusions of reference letters, the importance of them, tips, so really what to do and what not to do. We will go through some samples together, and then as I mentioned, I will have time at the end for questions. So the first bit, I just wanted to let you know who QCDC is. You may or may not have heard of us before. QCDC is a shortened and easy way to say the Qatar Career Development Center. So usually we are based out of Education City. We are still working remotely currently. I think someone's unmuted themselves. If you could just mute yourself if you don't mind. I hear a bit of an echo. So QCDC's mission is to really help the youth in Qatar reach their educational and career goals through our variety of initiatives, whether it's workshops, whether it's events, whether it's resources. Our mission is to really support students in their educational and career journey. We work not only with students, but also with influencers, so academics, career counselors, teachers such as yourself, parents, policymakers. We work with the ministry quite a bit, so we have a very wide range and diverse audience of people that we look to support. And then I just want to highlight at the very end here, I would encourage you all to connect with us. We've got a variety of different platforms that you can connect with us on. Of course, we've got LinkedIn. On our platform on LinkedIn, we post helpful articles, we post upcoming events, we post opinion editorials. We've got a lot of great information on our LinkedIn platform. We also have a YouTube channel where we have recorded different workshops and presentations, panel sessions, webinars, which you can access those on YouTube. And then our website has quite a few different resources for yourself, for parents, for students on a variety of different topics. It could even be things like interview tips. We have a publication as well called the Career Guide. This is a free online magazine and you can download the app. This would be useful for yourself as well as for students. It has interviews, it has tips, it has just general guide on career guidance. So I would encourage you all to connect with us in whatever way that you feel comfortable. So that's just a little bit about QCDC, who we are as an organization. All right, so to begin with, I would like to get a feeling for where you all are at sort of in your own experience with regards to reference letter writing. So if you've got your mobile phone handy, if you want to open up your camera app and just hover over this QR code, it will bring up a poll. And I want to know about how many reference letters have you written so far in your career? And it could be reference letters, it could be letters of recommendation, doesn't matter if it's US, UK, whatever, just about how many have you written in your career so far. So take a minute, vote, and we'll get a sense for where everyone is at with regards to their experience level. And once you submit your vote, the nice thing about this poll is you can actually see how everyone has voted. Oh, I see someone says hundreds. You're in my 100+ club, lovely. So we've got 31%, 32% now, 0 to 5, 26%, 10 to 25. Yep. Quite a few, about 60. Excellent. Let's see more votes coming in. So everyone has some level of experience. As I mentioned, those of you who are in the hundreds, I'm going to refer to you as my 100+ club. So I might be calling on you throughout the session. Maybe you've got some experience that you would be more than happy to share with everyone. So thank you for voting and letting me know where you're at with regards to writing reference letters. So as I should mention, this presentation today will focus on the UCAS reference letter. I understand some of you might write recommendation letters for US applications. The information in this will still apply and be relevant, but today's session is geared towards those UK UCAS applications. All right, so let's talk about the basics for a reference letter. So first of all, it includes information that the university cannot glean from the student's application. So we all know what comes on the student's application. We receive their student transcripts, their scores, but what this is wanting to know is to add to that, to tell a little bit more about the student's characteristics or the personal traits. So things that the university can't necessarily tell from the student's application. It also will show the admissions tutor how a student's skills allow them to thrive at university. Hopefully, they would thrive at university, but you're trying to make that connection from your perspective as a teacher who's worked with a student for an extended period of time. It's trying to make that connection with that teacher or that admissions tutor, how exactly the student has the necessary skills to be able to thrive in that university setting. And then it complements the student's personal statement. So hopefully the student has written their personal statement by the time you began writing their reference letter, and you really want it to complement that personal statement. So you don't want to repeat what's being sent there, but you do want to create a synergy between your reference letter and the student's personal statement. So it's important, if the student doesn't have the personal statement yet, have a bit of a chat with them, find out a little bit more information about what they are planning on writing in their personal statement and what their career goals are. We'll be talking about this coming up, so that you can really emphasize some of the things that you think that that university might be looking for, and that you can complement the student's personal statement. Okay, so what to include in a reference letter? So you want to include the student's academic ability. If the student, for example, is in the top 10% of your class, well then specify that. But with the academic ability, you're not simply just saying their scores, but you want to also show their academic potential. So do they have the potential to grasp the academic concepts in higher education? So really make sure that when you think about their academic ability, it's their ability within your class, but also their potential academic ability as well whenever they do progress to the higher levels. You also want to include their interest in their subject as well as their motivation in it. So this is where the personal statement can come in handy, but find out and talk to the student and emphasize that in your reference letter. What is their interest in the subject? And if you can, show a connection between their interest in the subject you teach and how that relates to their course of choice for the university that they are applying for the universities. As we talked about, you want to show those transferable skills. These are the things that the admissions tutors can't really find out about from the application itself, but you as a teacher who's seen them regularly would have a really good understanding of their transferable skills. And what I mean by transferable skills are those soft skills that are really, really important for not just university, but after university life. Things like communication, organization, teamwork. All of these skills will show the admissions tutor that the student has the necessary traits to be able to be successful in this course. So think about the transferable skills that you would like to include for your student. And along with that goes the engagement in class. So how engaged is your student in your class? Are they highly engaged? Are they not as engaged? Think about how you can draw on that, again, to make it very clear to those who are reading your reference letters exactly what kind of student this will be in university setting. So are they really engaged? They're very excited. That would then translate, obviously, to someone who's very engaged and excited in the university course. So you're, again, trying to show them what kind of student they are in your class and how engaged are they. That way they can determine whether or not they would be an appropriate fit for that course. And the suitability to the course. So I've talked a few times already, re-emphasized the connection between what you are writing and the course that the student is applying for. So from your perspective and from your understanding of what is required for that course, talk about how the student is suitable for that course. So when you are starting your reference letter, make sure that you obviously know what courses your student is applying for. Have a look through some of those courses at whichever universities they're interested in and get an understanding for what are some skills and traits that that specific course requires, and talk about how the student demonstrates those skills in your reference letter. That will really take your reference letter to that next level. So to show them the student has these skills, and this is how these skills would be suitable in the course that they are applying for. And then a tip at the end of your reference letter. So I know you've got maybe a couple of paragraphs with which to write a really impactful statement. What I would suggest is at the very end of your 2 paragraphs or whatever it is you've got, however many word count, have a really impactful closing statement that reflects on how you feel that student will thrive in the selected course. So it could re-emphasize that you definitely would recommend this student, but really try to have something at the end to make that impact. And I'll give you some examples later on in subsequent slides. Okay, so for following up on that, I want to just touch briefly on the COVID-19 impact. So when you're writing your reference letter and you're thinking about all of these transferable skills that a student is demonstrating, obviously this year has been an exceptional year in many ways. With the pandemic, everyone's method of learning has changed. We've made a lot of adjustments that will naturally have affected the environment that the student was learning in. So with this, I want you to remember that, first of all, the pandemic has affected everyone around the world. So if it really hasn't had a very big impact on your students specifically within your context of the class, it might not be something that you really need to include. The UCAS website has quite a bit of information on this, so you're welcome to take a look at that. I would avoid anything specific about, or anything general, I should say, about the impact it had on your school. What UCAS actually recommends is that you have a bit of that on your website, so that way when you are writing your couple of paragraphs, you can really focus on the student's performance in your class. Now, what they can't necessarily tell, and where you might think about adding something in, is if the student might be affected by illness or bereavement, or if there were any barriers related to online provisions with regards to their home learning environment. So if they had exceptional challenges to overcome and they did amazingly well, that might be something to include. I do want to emphasize, specifically with the illness or bereavement, I would not disclose anything that students not comfortable with, so just bear that in mind. But also with regards to the impact of the pandemic, on a positive side, if the student was really innovative and very creative and suggested a new way of for you to, I don't know, present material or utilize technology differently, then that might be something that you could include if that student is applying for a course that values innovation or you're wanting to highlight problem solving. So really have a think about it. I wouldn't necessarily devote and include this bit for everyone, but I wanted to touch upon it because obviously it's something we've all experienced. So again, just reflect on, is this going to be the most information for that student? Or if not, then you can avoid that altogether. But I just wanted to mention that briefly. Okay, so we've talked about what to include in a reference letter, but I want to talk a little bit about the importance of your reference letter. It is very, very important, the letter that you write to the student, even the couple of paragraphs that get compiled together, it's very important. When an admissions tutor is looking at your reference letter and they're comparing students, if all things are equal, then, and one has a strong reference letter and the other one doesn't, well, then that could make the difference between a student receiving an offer or an interview or not. So what you write is very crucial for that student. It does make a huge difference. And also, your information that you're writing provides a reliable and objective third-party perspective. So we've got the objective information coming through with the scores and the transcripts and all of that. We've got the personal statement, which is obviously, subjective from the student's perspective, but you as their teacher are a third party that can really provide that admissions tutor provide them with a better insight into that student's ability to thrive in the classroom. So you provide that perspective to them that they can't gain otherwise. So it is very important. And in addition, the reference letter, it reinforces the characteristics that the student might be talking about in their personal statement, and it also validates the academic record. So there's a lot of reasons why you write this reference letter, but it is hugely important to the student's application process. A few considerations that I want to talk about when you're writing your reference letter. The first thing is that admissions tutors will read through mini rec letters. And I say that because I want to emphasize that because it's important to really think about what you are writing in their context. So if you think that they're reading through several different applications, you want to ensure that your words stand out, that your paragraph or two paragraphs are really impactful. You don't want yours to get lost in the mix. You want to do whatever you can to really help that student and support that student. So I just remind that they're reading through a lot of rec letters. And I've always told students the same thing with regards to cover letters, for example. When you're writing cover letters and applying for jobs, they read through so many. So ensure that you're thinking, how can you make yours stand out? And as I said, you are trying to help that student stand out. I put this little image at the bottom here because I thought it was a nice visual. If you've got, sea of these white flowers, for example, and you can relate that to many different applications, many different students, how do you ensure that your student is that red flower, the one that stands out? So when you write your reference letter, think about ensuring that student does stand out from the pack, does actually distinguish themselves from someone else. And I thought that this tip, this third dot point, was really helpful way to think about things. When they're reading through the application and the reference letter, they're not looking for reasons necessarily to reject a student, but they're looking more for reasons to accept a student. So think about that too when you're writing, is you don't need to say, these are the things the student is doing and you might not want to accept them. You want to focus on the positives. And I will talk more about that coming up. But I thought that that was a really nice way to remember, is that they're looking for reasons to accept, not reject. And then, of course, you've got a maximum number of lines that you can utilize. So use the space wisely. Make each of your words very impactful. Make it stand out. Make a difference for that student. Help them be that red flower in a sea of these white flowers. Okay, so what to do? Number one, most important, know your student and their goals. I know you've probably got a platform where they submit the request to write a reference letter. They might include some information. I know some schools will utilize what they call like a brag sheet or something, but I would suggest too, if you don't feel as though you know enough about your student, speak to them. Make it a point to ask them, what are their career goals? What are they trying to achieve with this course that they're applying for? What are their preferences? What are they wanting to feature in their personal statement? So really get to know that student if you don't feel like you have enough information. It can really help you to contextualize that student by understanding a little bit more about their own goals and values. I've already talked about reading their personal statement, so just reiterate that. Hopefully, again, that they have it done by the time they submit your request. But again, talk to that student, really understand that student, write your reference letter to complement their personal statement. The next dot point is incredibly important. It's to be honest. Whether that student is high performing or not, it is not your role to lie. Your role is to be very honest and to be very objective. It doesn't do the student any favors if you say that they're well adjusted to deal with an academically rigorous program and they might not be. So it doesn't do the student any favor, and it also doesn't do any favors for your own integrity. So be honest when you are writing your recommendation letter. I will talk about how to broach the maybe not as academically gifted students. So I will talk a little bit about that coming up, but obviously it is very important to both you and the student and the university to be honest in your reference letter. You want to also provide context to the student's attainment. So what I mean by that is if the student has any particularly challenging situations that they've overcome, talk about that within your reference letter. Talk about what they have done to really get to where they are. Provide that context from your experience, your knowledge of them in the classroom. So again, adding that value that the university can't glean from their application. And the last two are crucial. Give specific examples and tell a bit of a narrative. So with specific examples, you want to make sure that you provide evidence to that university, to the admissions tutor who's reading through your letter, that really helps them to visualize the student. So you can say things, people oftentimes have a habit of saying, oh, the student is very hardworking. But what does hardworking really mean? It is a very general and vague term. So maybe for you in your classroom, for that specific student, hardworking might mean doing extra research outside of what's required. Maybe hardworking means helping other students. So ensure that you are specific. Give specific examples, because what that does is it creates this narrative for the student. It creates a bit of an imagery for that admissions tutor to start to visualize in their head exactly what kind of student that is. So be very specific, back up everything that you say with evidence. And this is one of those ways where you can help the students stand out, is to provide examples and then demonstrate or talk about how that might be relevant to their course. So I have a TEDx video. I'm only going to play the first 2 minutes of it, but I really liked this video because the first bit of what he talks about is really around the same idea of creating a narrative. He calls it the power of storytelling, but it's the same idea, is thinking about how you as a teacher can add to that student's narrative. You can add to that student's story, if you will, to help the admissions tutor formulate a better picture of it. So I'll play this and we'll talk about it after we watch the first couple of minutes. And if you don't mind, once I hit play, if one or two of you could just raise your hand and let me know that you hear the sound, because I've had trouble with that before. So once I hit play, if you don't mind raising your hand to ensure you can hear it, and then we'll move forward. I'm going to pause right there. Can everyone hear the video? Raise
No,
your hand.
nothing.
There's nothing.
Sorry, it wasn't playing anything.
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you. Okay, no worries. So what I'll do is I will email this to everyone afterwards so that you've got it, but I'll tell you a little bit about what he says in this video. So he talks about a journalist who does an experiment where he buys 200 objects on eBay. Each item cost maybe $1. Then he contacted 200 authors and asked them to write a story about the object. So it's essentially saying this author is now writing about whatever the object was. So then once he has these 200 stories for the article or for the objects, he posts them back on eBay to see how much they would sell for. And what he found is that each item increased in value around 6,000%. So for example, one item in the example he gives here was like a horse's head, just a figurine horse's head, purchased for about 95 cents, and it was then sold for about $65.95. And that was the case for all of the objects. And I really loved this talk because I thought it really helped solidify the importance of what you are doing as a teacher for your students' educational journey. You are writing that narrative for them to help them increase in value in the eyes of the admissions tutor. So what you write is obviously very, very important to that student's application, and it can make a very big difference. So like I said, I will email this presentation out to everyone, and you can watch this TEDx video. The first 2 minutes are all that you need to watch. But again, I thought it was a really good visualization and example of what you are doing as an educator. So with that being said, earlier about being specific, I wanted to give you some examples of what that might look like. How on the left is a bit of a generic example, and then how on the right we can really add to that. So here's a start. Muhammad is pleasant and affable in class. That's lovely. It's nice. Nothing bad in there, but it's a bit general and a bit vague. You could probably apply that to many students. So it's a sentence that really helps that student stand out. So what can you do to enhance that? So here's an example. Muhammad is the rare student who seems genuinely happy to discuss Chaucer. So if you're an English teacher, this might be something you can write. But from the right-hand column, we're already starting to visualize a little bit about this student. I don't know about you, but my brain immediately starts to picture a student who's smiling and eager to discuss something. And the fact that they even just said the rare student, meaning not everyone in class is that excited. So already taking what's on the left and enhancing it just a little bit creates that value, really increases and enhances what you are writing for your reference. So the next example, Sarah is a great critical thinker. Again, that's fantastic. That's a great skill. We talked about transferable skills, so you're demonstrating that, but again, it's too general. You could probably apply that to many students. So in your context as a teacher, one of their teachers, how is Sarah a great critical thinker? How can you illustrate that a little bit clearer? So here's an example. Sarah is talented at considering the subtleties within literature and the purpose behind authors' works. So again, we're getting a better understanding of what Sarah does in class, how she is a critical thinker. By just expanding upon that and really reflecting yourself to say, what example could I give when someone says, what do you mean she's a critical thinker? That's what you want to include in your reference letter. So last example. Noor excels at public speaking. Again, that's a great trait, one of those transferable skills that we talked about, but still very general. So here's an example. As a public speaker, Noor holds the attention of an entire assembly. When speaking one-on-one, she demonstrates empathetic listening skills as well as a powerful intellect. So I bet most of you are visualizing Noor standing on a stage speaking to an audience of students, and all of the students are smiling and nodding and really engaged with what she's saying. So again, you're creating that narrative. You're helping that student stand out by providing from your point of view, your context, exactly what that student has done to demonstrate that skill. So those are specifics. Now, to help you think of what you can include in your reference letter, these are some general traits that you can start first by thinking, okay, where has my student shown these traits? And then extracting those specific examples about. So universities are looking to hear when a student demonstrates intellectual capability, curiosity, motivation, initiative, if they have any special talents, their maturity levels, integrity, independence, originality, potential for growth. This is not an exhaustive list of everything a university is looking for, but these are some really core traits that, again, if you're having a bit of trouble, if you're a little bit stuck on what to write about a student, keep this list near you and you can go through and think about, okay, actually, you know, the student really demonstrated curiosity in my class by, you know, asking really insightful questions. So maybe that's something that you could use to write about, and then go back to the previous slide and extract that specific example. Or maybe you want to talk about their integrity or whatever it might be. But this can be a helpful guide for you to get started if you're kind of stuck on how do you begin writing your reference letter, is to think about these traits, which ones your students might have demonstrated, and also which ones might be important for the courses that they're applying for, and then giving those specific examples. So what I would recommend to you, you might have your own system, but keep this list or keep another list handy. And anytime you're in class and you notice a student's demonstrated one of these skills, jot down that example. Maybe you keep it in an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, but jot down that example. Because oftentimes when you start writing these reference letters, it's easy to forget all of the things that a student has demonstrated or think of specific examples. So having this next to you and writing down some examples for a student, and then when you go to write, you've got something to work with, might be a helpful way for you to begin. Okay, I realize you can't probably see this too well. These are questions straight from the UCAS website. Again, you are welcome to take a look on your own, but these are similar to the traits that we just looked at on the previous screen, just with a bit more information written to them. So these are helpful, again, to build and craft that narrative about the students. So things like, how willing are they to think, read, or debate beyond the syllabus or prescribed materials? How well do they communicate? How interested are they in evidence-based discussion? So all of these can be prompts as well for you to begin writing your reference letter for your student. So perhaps you want to even keep these questions nearby and you can jot down examples as you observe them in class, or perhaps you like the previous list, but both of these can be helpful in structuring and knowing what to write for your reference letter. Okay, so we talked about what to do. Now we're going to talk about a few don'ts, what not to do. You don't want to repeat what's on the student's application. So they have all of that information. You want to add to that. So again, talk about those things that they can't see from the application. Talk about their characteristic traits, the transferable skills, their motivation levels, all of those sorts of things. So don't repeat what's on the student's application. Also, don't speak in generalities. We've already talked about that. Be specific. That is what is impactful. And don't use cliches. So if you say this is one of the brightest students you've ever taught, maybe be a little bit more specific. Maybe this is the only student who scored a perfect score on, you know, whatever exam or whatever essay. Or if the student is in the top 5% of all your classes, maybe mention that. But avoid using cliches. This is one of my favorite students, or one of my brightest students. Those get repeated and utilized often. And again, don't add value to that student. So be as specific as possible. And this one I know is probably not going to be ideal for everyone, but you don't want to copy and paste from previous letters or previous paragraphs, because oftentimes what happens is when you see words already written, sometimes you try to make a student fit into what you already have written, rather than really thinking and reflecting on that student and writing something that's suitable to them. So I would be very cautious about copying and pasting or reutilizing the same information. Admissions tutors can recognize things that are sort of duplicated, so I would just be very cautious about it. And that's why I do suggest to, keep that list of skills or traits, jot down as you're going throughout the semester things that you're noticing of your student. That way you're not even tempted to simply duplicate, but you are already beginning to formulate the structure of your reference letter. And then you don't want to write it as a report. So I mentioned that we will speak about students who maybe aren't as academically gifted, what to do. I'll talk about that, I think, on the next slide. But for those students, you don't want to say things like, oh, this student really should focus on this, or this student would, really benefit from these trainings or whatever. So you don't want to write it as a report, but you're wanting to focus on your context as an educator and their positive skills. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So when you get a student who's requested a reference letter, and maybe as we talked about, they're not as strong as perhaps other students. The important thing is be honest, as we've already talked about. You don't want to sugarcoat that. You need to be very clear. But you want to focus on something that they did do very well. So again, you're trying to show the admissions tutors why they should accept them, not necessarily why they should reject them, but you're still wanting to be honest. So a couple of examples might be, the student has made steady progress in overcoming the obstacles presented in the course. Something like that gives the admissions tutor a clear indication that, yes, it's a challenging course. Yes, the student has struggled, but that they've made progress and they've continually worked to overcome that obstacle. Or despite being a challenging course, the student has not given up. I would expand on that a bit further, but just to give you an idea of how you can word it. Or even, the student demonstrated initiative when it was clear they needed extra support in this advanced level course. So these are all nice ways to say, look, this was a really hard course for the student. Maybe they don't have high marks, but what are some positives? Did they demonstrate initiative? Did they demonstrate determination? What are some key traits that you can draw on that would be meaningful for that student? So this is how you can address these challenges. And these are questions that once you've written your reference letter, are good for you to ask yourself and to reflect on. So I'll go through these and explain what I mean. So does the reference give a true contextual reflection of the student within your experience? Your experience is what's important. You might know what the student does outside of class. If that doesn't have much to do with your class or the course that they're applying for, then you don't necessarily need to expand on it. Talk about within your context, within your class, does it give a true reflection of the student? And again, the true reflection being something that is honest and something that doesn't overinflate or underinflate the student's abilities. Does the recommendation describe the student's academic ability? We've talked a bit about this. Does it talk about the type of learner they are, their level of classroom engagement, how they approach problem solving, or how they might overcome academic adversity? And the last one, is your letter authentic? And what I mean by this is, if you were to take your couple of paragraphs that you've written and remove the student's name, if you were to then give that to another student in the same class, would that student be able to identify who you'd written about? That's a really good way to reflect on if you think it's authentic. I'm not saying for you to do that, to pass around your reference letters with the names removed, but that's a helpful way for you to start to think about, is this an authentic representation of the student? And again, going back to that image of the flowers, you don't want your recommendation letter to blend in with all of the other applications. You want it to be very authentic for that student. So I find it helpful once you've written yours to reflect on that, to think about, if you removed the name, would someone know who you're talking about? And that's a good way to determine whether or not you feel as though it's authentic. Oh, I'm sorry, can you not see anything on the slide? Is anyone else having trouble seeing on the slide? If you'll just raise your hand if you are. Okay, let me see. Could you see this slide? Raise your hand if you could, if you don't mind. Some people can, some people can't. Okay, so everyone can see this slide. Thank you. You can put your hands down. So this slide, even if you can't see the content, I have just gone through and explained it all. And like I said, I will email out and you can then see it afterwards. Okay, so hopefully you can see this example. If not, I will read through it. So I want to talk through some examples, and at the end of each of these examples, I will be asking for your feedback. So even if you can't see the slide, just I'll be reading through the example. So here it goes. It has been an absolute pleasure teaching Amelia for the last 3 years. Not only is she bright and top of her class, but she is a true leader and gladly helps other students needing support, not only with understanding material, but also with motivation and encouragement. She has done exceptionally well in all areas of the Maths Studies curriculum this year, but the topic that will most benefit her chosen course of International Relations and Politics is statistics, as she has learned to analyze connections between different data points. As an example of her interest in international relations and politics, she will complete a comparative study on the Human Development Index and female employment in her internal assessment for this course. Amelia is completing a statistical analysis of the Human Development Index and female employment to see if there's a relationship between the two. She has had to learn how to gather and sample valid data from respected sources, select appropriate mathematical processes, and draw conclusions from this. She hopes to show that higher female employment leads to higher HDI. Progression into higher education is a natural and appropriate step for Amelia, and I have no reservations in recommending her. So I would like to open up the floor and ask what you all think of this example. You can unmute yourself, you can utilize the chat function, or if you wish to simply raise your hand to indicate that you feel it's a strong example, please do so. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you think it's a strong example, raise your hand or feel free to comment in the chat. I see some hands raised. Yep. Great. Okay, so some hands are raised. Those of you with raised hands, I would invite you to tell us why you think this is a strong example. What are some specifics that we see throughout this, this example here that really indicate that it is a strong example? So again, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can utilize the chat function to write what you think. So reflecting on what we've talked about, what to do in a reference letter, what do you notice that they have done in this letter that makes it a strong letter? Okay, if no one feels comfortable unmuting themselves or putting in the chat, let's talk through this example then a little bit. Oh, I see some. Here comes some. So we've got relating the course content to the subject they want to apply for. Exactly. So we saw that this reference letter said exactly how that she will apply that. So it says in her chosen course of International Relations and Politics, you know, for a maths course, you might think, well, what is the relevance there? But they showed that correlation. They said, you know, in this maths course, the relevance is within statistics. She had to learn and analyze different points. So they made that connection. Perfect. Specific use of examples of the work done by the student that fits within her chosen course. Exactly. So that is perfect what I wanted to talk about with this example is we see exactly from the teacher's perspective specific examples of projects she's worked on. If you were to, like we talked about with the authenticity, if you were to remove the name and hand this to someone else, they might be able to guess which student this refers to because it is very specific. It gives examples of the course that she's talking about. Then we'll go into a few more details that I want to talk about. At the end, as we mentioned briefly, to talk about one final reflection statement to end on a powerful note. So you can see here that this teacher has written, progression into higher education is a natural and appropriate step for Amelia, and I have no reservations in recommending her. So ending on, yes, here is my recommendation, but wording it in a way, it's a natural and appropriate step, or you can say the student's academic ability lends themselves in good stead with a, rigorous program, but really think about a way to end your couple of paragraphs. Now, one thing I do want to mention with this, the first statement and a half might not be as impactful as it could be. So it has been an absolute pleasure teaching Amelia for the last 3 years. Not only is she bright and top of her class, so those are nice, but does that really add, exactly, thank you, some generalities, right, in the beginning. So we want to expand on that, provide a bit of depth to that, because essentially with the limited amount of space, this isn't telling us anything. So we want something a little bit more specific. If she's bright and top of her class, again, what does that mean? Top of her class is very general. It could, we don't know what sort of context that is. Yep, and someone's saying add score data, exactly. So there's some good examples in here. There's some good content. Is it, that red flower? It might be a pink flower, for example. It's almost there. It really does have some great content, but it does still have some of those generalities that we're wanting to avoid. Let's look at another example. So I'll read this one as well. I realize we're running low on time, so I want to go through the next couple just a little bit quickly. But it is always humbling to teach a student who is smarter than you. Zara is one of these students, and while she has plenty to learn, it is her ability to grasp concepts quickly on a very deep level that characterizes her high intelligence. Her need to understand the why behind what she learns leads her to ask questions that are at times difficult to answer. In our units on statistics and probability, for example, she often asked, what if we changed the scenario in this way? How would that change the solution? This type of question is crucial in the study of politics, both in this field and as a journalist. As an example of her interest in politics, she will be completing a comparative study on social welfare and perceptions of how it is applied in different countries for her internal assessment in this course. So again, feel free to write some of your thoughts. What do you think about this? We see that they've made connections to the course, which is really great. We don't see the end statement as we talked about. That might be useful, a really powerful reflection at the very end. That could certainly elevate it a little bit further. And I think this statement, one of these students, and while she has plenty to learn, it is her ability to grasp concepts. This is the teacher being, honest and saying she still has a lot to learn, but she is very good critical thinker. She always questions. She's got a very high intelligence level. So again, some good content in this. Could be some things that you want to add to it. Oh, thank you, yes, for your comment. The first statement kind of could sound like a little bit of an exaggeration. Exactly. So again, they say humbling to teach a student who is smarter than you, but then say, and while she has plenty to learn. So avoid cliches, be very mindful of your words and provide evidence. Always back it up with support. So this one, again, sounds a little bit odd. Some good content in here, but not necessarily the best. So let's take another example. This one is shorter, but I'll go through this. After an intense start to the course, John has made considerable progress in his mathematical skills. While others might give up at such challenges, John has demonstrated his commitment to the course and strives towards comprehension through asking important questions. John never hesitates to take initiative, as indicated through his organization of a study group. So it's very clear from this example that the student is not as academically strong as perhaps others. But this is very general, right? It's a little bit too vague. There's no connection to the course. There's no powerful final statement. There's no specific examples. So this would be an example of a weak reference for a not as strong student. even if the student is not as academically strong, you do still want to write a strong reference for them, again, focusing on those positives. So some of this provides maybe a good foundation. You know, these are maybe nice ways to word some of the challenges that that student has experienced, but you would want to add more depth to that, specifics, not so general. So I'm getting close to the end, so I want to ensure again that we do have a few minutes left for questions. So just to summarize what we've discussed, firstly, and most importantly, your reference does make a difference. It is very impactful for the student. Please do go back and watch even the first couple minutes of that TED Talk, because I think that, you know, as educators, our goal is to ensure the students fulfill their potential. And in you writing your reference letter for the student, you are helping ensure that that student does fulfill their educational potential. So it makes a big difference. Be honest, but also be positive. Don't sugarcoat things, don't overinflate things, but find the positive traits and expand on those and give specific examples. Craft that narrative, create that story, help them stand out, help them to be that red flower in a sea of white flowers by giving those specific examples. These are additional resources you'll get whenever you receive the presentation. We've got about 5 minutes. I do want you to do the survey, but before we jump to the survey, I would like to open it up and see if anyone has questions. You might unmute yourself, or you could certainly utilize the chat, whatever you prefer. But I would like to open the floor and see what questions you have. I see some comments, so I'm going to read this one aloud. In that first example, I would also suspect there may be some overlap with what the student would, or at least perhaps should have been guided to include in her own personal statement. In your experience or opinion, what has a greater impact, the personal statement or the reference? That's a really great question, and honestly, it's hard to say. I would say both are important. Your bit provides a different perspective, so it's not necessarily saying that one is weighted more or over another, but yours provides that third-party objective perspective, and that's what they are looking for out of that reference. Is, you know, the personal statement is important. They want to hear about the student, about their motivation and all of those sorts of things, but again, that's going to be a little bit subjective from the student's point of view. So the way that they're really utilizing yours is not necessarily weighted heavier or less heavy than the personal statement, but is backing up maybe what the student says, and validating that. Or if the student has, you know, said what they think that the admissions tutor wants to say, then, you know, your reference might highlight other things or something. So it's not that they're comparing one or the other. They use them both, but in different ways, if that helps. Other questions or thoughts? Any of my 100+ club who've written quite a few reference letters, if you would like to add anything else, I'm sure everyone would love to hear. Feel free to either type your thoughts or unmute yourself. And while everyone is maybe thinking about their questions, if you would like to go ahead and open up the survey, again, if you've got your mobile phone handy, open up the camera app, hover over the QR code. I know that it might be a little bit hard to see on your mobile phone, so I will just copy the link as well and put it in the chat. So if you will take a minute or two, please feel free to still ask me questions. Oh, I think that might look a bit, I don't know if you can click on the link. There's a question coming in. Isn't a reference normally given by each subject the student takes? Yes, generally for UCAS. Yep. Oh, you're welcome for the workshop. So again, take a few minutes, complete the survey. If you have any other feedback or thoughts, please leave it in that survey. I've put the link. It's a little bit funny looking, but you can click on it or you can use the QR code. I'm seeing some more chats come through. The teacher needs to know the major the student's applying for. Exactly. So if you don't know that, you need to make sure that you ask the student what course in particular that they are applying for. that will help provide context for what you write. So it's imperative that you know that about your student, is what course they are applying to, or what major, if you want to say it that way. Oh, you're welcome for the workshop completed. Thank you. So as the rest of you are perhaps coming up with questions or filling out your survey, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to attend this workshop today. Your presence in this workshop shows your commitment to your students, and I think that is really, really wonderful. So best of luck writing your reference letters. I hope everyone is staying safe and well during this time, and I hope that the rest of the semester goes well for everyone. So thank you very much. Feel free to reach out with further questions, complete the survey, or let me know if you need anything else. But thank you all, and I will email out the presentation afterwards. So thank you and enjoy your afternoon.
Hi Paige, can you hear me? Shazad.
I can hear you.
As things, I just want to say thank you very much. And that was a very informative session. And I think everyone took something from that. Even I took something as well. And we've always got something to learn. But that was really, really good. You know, some of the examples, like for example, throughout the year, when teachers are working with students, one-to-one meetings, even when they're doing stuff in class with them, they're jotting down certain things, certain qualities, and that is one of the most important things, getting to know your student. If you know your student, then you can talk about them, you know their skills, their qualities, their strengths, and their weaknesses as well. And that is one of the most important things I've took from this. You need to know your students. Once you know them, you can talk about them, and you can integrate that into their references.
Exactly. I'm glad you found it useful as well, and thank you for inviting me to do this presentation.
You're welcome.
I will email around the presentation itself, as I said to everyone who registered, but you're welcome to forward it on to anyone else. But yes, thank you so much for inviting us to do this presentation.
No problem. You're much, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. You do the same. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Hello, Paige.
Yes, I'm here still. Yes.
I just have a thank you for the presentation. Very useful. Just got a question regarding the transferable skills. Transferable skills. Are we looking at those skills which will help them for their particular course, for the university, or can we mention some generic courses? For example, I teach business, where we do a lot of numeracy, a lot of calculations, a lot of ratio analysis, and all of that. So should I mention numeracy skills as general, or should I mention particular calculations or particular ratios that the student would have done?
It really depends. So if whatever the student might be applying for, if the specific ratios or calculations would be relevant to that course that they're applying for, then you might list them out. If it's too much technical jargon, and if they're applying for a course that it wouldn't be relevant, then you can just kind of say numerous skills or whatever. So it depends on the course that they're applying for and the relevance of it. You do want to be specific, but again, if it's you're giving maths information and it's for something completely different, it might not be as impactful, for example.
Of course. So, for example, if they are, like I said, I'm business studies teacher. So, if the students are applying for, let's say, a law degree, I wouldn't have to be that specific. I could be very general. Whereas if it was a business course, then I would be a lot more specific and a lot more detail.
Yes, exactly. And when you say general too, general in the sense of you don't, as you said, need to give the specific calculations or ratios, but You do want to be specific in that if you mention a student has, I don't know, is really good at one of these areas, what does that look like? Does that mean that they earn top scores? So be specific, but not necessarily about the calculations, but be specific about how they've demonstrated that they're particularly adept at that or whatever it might be. Does that make sense?
Because I mean, one thing that I may want to show or say is that the fact that they're good at problem solving or